Formula 1's record-breaking 2022 calendar will include 23 Grand Prix across 21 different countries, including 2 trips to the United States for the first time in almost 40 years. Expanding F1's reach in America has been a key target in the Liberty Media era, and it has already enjoyed much more success in making a dent in the US than F1 did under Bernie Ecclestone. For example, who remembers Bernie's failed effort to launch the New Jersey Grand Prix? The inaugural Miami Grand Prix will join the now established race in Austin to give F1 its first pair of US races since 1984. In this video, we'll explain what Liberty's doing and how it's working, but also highlight the key missing piece in the bid to properly crack America. The American influence on Formula 1 is almost certainly at an all-time high. Of course, there's US ownership of F1 itself since the 2017 season in the form of Liberty Media, which bought the rights to F1 from CVC and ousted Ecclestone as a result. There are 2 US Grand Prix again and potentially a third one coming, which we'll come to later in this video. F1 has an ostensibly American team in Haas despite the car being draped in a Russian flag, and Michael Andretti tried to make it too by buying Sauber. Elsewhere on the grid, Williams is owned by a US investment firm, and McLaren has attracted major investment from a US consortium. Both of these only happened last year. That also appears to be translating into greater interest, judging by Netflix Drive to Survive audiences, the size of the recent US Grand Prix crowd, and the line of commercial deals being done with American companies. F1's Austin weekend featured a bumper attendance, with 120,000 fans turning up for just Friday practice. There were 140,000 on Sunday and a total weekend attendance of almost 400,000. That made it comfortably F1's biggest fan-attended event of the year. The championship is wary of declaring it as cracked the USA, given there could be a pent-up demand for events after the coronavirus pandemic. But the attention on the event was significant. More than 1 million fans also watched the race on ABC, the second highest television audience ever for the US Grand Prix and the highest since 2004, before the scandalous 2005 race at Indianapolis that seriously hurt F1's image in the States. The 1.2 million ABC figure is also 42% up on the last US Grand Prix in 2019 and makes this race the most watched of the 2021 season. That suggests more US fans are re-engaging, but we could probably have told F1 that, given how many of you watching this are probably from the States. We're really pleased to have you along, thank you so much for your support, and if you're watching this and not already subscribed, how about changing that just now by clicking the button below. Several teams have underlined the potential F1 sees in the US with a swathe of commercial deals. The rebranded Aston Martin team has prioritised massive companies from the US, bringing in IT consulting company Cognizant as a title partner that's been described as F1's biggest deal since tobacco sponsorship was outlawed. Aston has also struck deals with American firms like SentinelOne and NetApp. Earlier this year, Red Bull did its own agreements with Cash App, Tezos, Oracle and Walmart, while McLaren boasts Coca-Cola as one of its sponsors and has a major partnership with Arrow Electronics. World champion Mercedes has a partnership with American cybersecurity technology company CrowdStrike that includes the rebranding of the safety and medical cars it supplies to F1. The timing of this increasing number of US-driven commercial deals is almost certainly not a coincidence. The obvious missing ingredient in F1's American push is the lack of a driver from the USA. While F1 is represented by Northern and Central American drivers in the form of Canadians Lance Stroll and Nicholas Latifi and Mexican Sergio Perez, there has not been a US driver on the grid since Alexander Rossi's park campaign at the end of 2015 with the struggling Marussia team. Prior to Rossi, Scott Speed's season and a half with Toro Rosso in 2006-2007 made him the first American representative on the grid since Michael Andretti's truncated McLaren campaign in 1993. The importance of a home driver for US fans has been acknowledged many times by F1. We've just had a good example of how valuable this can be with the response Perez got from his home crowd in Mexico. Earlier this year, F1 CEO Stefano Domenicali said the championship was working with teams trying to understand what is needed to get an American driver into the championship. But he admitted it was considered unlikely to happen in the next 2 or 3 years. A large part of the problem has been the lack of a star US driver in F1's main feeder series. There were 4 Americans in Formula 3 this season, including 2 that were on F1 Junior programs, Sauber Academy driver Juan Manuel Correa and Red Bull Junior Jack Crawford. The others were BRDC British Formula 3 champion Caolan Frederick and 2020 F3 title contender Logan Sargent, who has since joined Williams' F1 Driver Academy. The popularity and quality of the US's own IndyCar series has been a major factor in the lack of US representation in F1. Two-time IndyCar champion Joseph Newgarden is a good example. Now 30 years old, he was briefly on the F1 ladder back in 2010 in the GP3 series. But his inexperience, having graduated straight from British Formula Ford, meant he failed to make an impact and he swiftly returned to the States. Colton Herta was also briefly on the European scene, finishing third in the British equivalent of Formula 4, the year McLaren F1 driver Lando Norris won the title. Herta spent a year racing Formula 3 machinery in Euro Formula Open, finishing third again, before returning to the USA like Newgarden did and focusing on the IndyCar career ladder. The talk of the Andretti organisation potentially buying Sauber briefly raised expectations it would bring Herta across to F1 because he races for Andretti in IndyCar. Michael Andretti has since confirmed that was on the cards, but those hopes have been dashed, for as we've previously explained, the Andretti bid has fallen through. But as Rossi and Speed have shown before, it's not enough to simply get an American driver into any car. United States Grand Prix promoter Bobby Epstein reckons American representation on the grid will only have an impact if they can be a frontrunner. He said, "I think a winning American driver can sustain 3 or 4 Grand Prix in the US. Just having an American team doesn't put fans in the stands. We found that out because Haas and Günther Steiner and those guys have put the best product they can out there. I think an American champion would do great. If they're not winners, then the effect will be short-lived." F1's increasing footprint in the United States could even lead to a third race, potentially in Las Vegas, being added to the calendar in the coming years. The advent of the popular Netflix docuseries Drive to Survive has regularly been cited as an important asset in that quest, and the grueling process to get the Miami race on the calendar shows how important F1 thinks it is to have more US races. But it doesn't just want more US races, it wants the right ones, hence the reference to destination races that you might be familiar with. Miami stands for everything F1's trying to achieve, and a race in Las Vegas would tick the same boxes, another race in America in a defining location. F1 and Vegas don't exactly have a happy history, and the suggestion of a return to the casino-filled city might concern fans who remember the Caesars Palace Grand Prix less than fondly. The race was an F1 World Championship round twice in 1981 and 1982, using a miserably repetitive layout in the car park of the famous hotel that gave the race its name. A modern-day Las Vegas Grand Prix would be highly unlikely to repeat the same mistakes. And it's understood that a Vegas race with a street track potentially incorporating its famous strip is one of F1's next major priorities, along with a second Grand Prix in China. F1 hasn't had 3 races in the US since 1982, coincidentally the last time Vegas was on the calendar. The city's been linked with an F1 race on various occasions in the intervening years, but without any notable progress. Now F1 is officially exploring the possibility of a race with the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority. This government agency is the power player in Vegas, which as a resort city relies extensively on tourism, something that suffered during the COVID-19 pandemic. The LVCVA has worked to bring various major sporting events to the city, including the NBA All-Star Game, WWE SummerSlam, CONCACAF Gold Cup, and even the 2022 NFL Draft, while Vegas itself has been the home of NFL franchise the Raiders since 2020. F1's believed to feel confident a Grand Prix would fit the Vegas portfolio, and the right kind of Las Vegas Grand Prix could be a very good addition to the World Championship. The race could be paired with Miami to maximise the geographical spread of 3 races in the US, a prospect backed by many drivers. There are likely to be plenty of hurdles to clear on both sides if such a race was ever to materialise, but it's said to be an option that interests both parties. And in the Liberty Media era, that tends to be enough for an idea to at least be seriously pursued. But what would you rather see, a third race in the United States or an American driver on the grid? Where would you like the race, and which US driver would you like to see on the grid? Let us know in the comments, give this video a like if you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe to the channel and have notifications turned on, and we'll see you again in the future for another video.